The soft ping cut through the quiet of the first-class cabin like a blade. No one turned. No one noticed. Except one. Dr. Naomi Carter sat in seat 2A, back straight, eyes fixed on the digital flight path, glowing on the small screen before her. All she wanted was a simple black coffee, hot, nothing more. Something so ordinary. Yet on Flight 417 of Asteria Airways, it became a spark to ignite a fire. From the moment she stepped into the gleaming cabin, Naomi had sensed something. A thin but sharp current in the air. Marjorie Hale, the veteran head flight attendant, 58 years old, her blonde hair stiff like a helmet, moved with the precision of 3 decades of training. She smiled warmly at Richard Bellamy, the wealthy lawyer in seat 1C, addressing him by name. She complimented Evelyn Shaw's cashmere scarf in 3B, speaking as though they were old friends. And seat 2A, it was treated as though it were empty. As though Doctor Who, Naomi Carter, one of the most powerful women in global agricultural technology, were nothing more than a shadow in this space of luxury. Naomi was used to eyes sliding past her, used to being underestimated in boardrooms full of white men in tailored suits. But every time it happened, the sting cut deep, like a blade pressed to flesh, dull yet searing. The first time, she stayed silent. The second, she pressed the call button. The second ping echoed. Marjorie appeared, her face stiff as wax. "Yes?" A single word, clipped and sharp. Naomi smiled calmly. "I believe you skipped me when serving. I would like a black coffee, thank you." The corner of Marjorie's mouth twitched, a parody of a smile. A flicker of disdain flashed in her eyes, then vanished. "I'll serve you when I've finished with the other passengers." Her voice was cold, each word dropped like a hammer. Naomi looked around. Everyone else had a drink. Everyone else had been attended to. Only seat 2A remained neglected. The call button glowed again. This time, Naomi held it for 3 seconds. The ping rang louder, drawing curious glances. Marjorie stormed out, her face flushed with anger. "I'm busy. You'll have to wait your turn." Naomi lifted her gaze, her voice low and deliberate. "Wait my turn? Everyone else has been served. I've asked twice. What is the real reason?" The air grew so taut it could be cut with a knife. Richard Bellamy lowered his paper. Evelyn Shaw froze with her fork mid-air. Everyone was watching. Everyone was listening. Marjorie leaned in, her voice honeyed but dripping with venom. "Honey, perhaps you don't know the rules here. This cabin is for our most exclusive guests. Occasionally, some people get upgraded by mistake. If you sit quietly and stay out of the way, things will be easier for everyone." This was no longer neglect. It was a sentence. In that moment, the familiar chill in Naomi's chest dissolved. In its place came absolute clarity. This was no longer about coffee. It was about dignity, about existence. Naomi Carter, the scientist who had spoken at Davos, the CEO of Terra Nova Labs with dozens of patents to her name, was being treated as someone who did not belong. Marjorie had no idea. She thought the black woman in the simple suit was just another shadow unworthy of respect. But in doing so, she had awakened a storm. Naomi drew in a slow breath. Her voice dropped, carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. Marjorie, you've made two mistakes. First, you think you know who I am. You do not. Second, you think I will accept your contempt. I will not. She lifted her phone, pulling up the direct contact line for Asteria Airways. I need to see the captain immediately. This is no longer about service. This is a matter of flight safety. Marjorie let out a dry, brittle laugh. The captain is flying the plane. He doesn't have time for your childish games. Naomi didn't flinch, her voice steady as stone. He will have time, and I promise what comes next will not be a game. It will be a trial in the sky. She turned her gaze to Tessa Nguyen, the young flight attendant trembling as she watched everything unfold. Tessa, inform Captain Aaron Whitaker that the passenger in seat 2A has a safety concern regarding the head flight attendant. Tell him it's urgent. The word safety fell into the cabin like an alarm bell. Eyes darted, whispers swirled. Tessa swallowed hard, nodded, and hurried toward the cockpit. Marjorie stood frozen in the aisle, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. The engine still roared steadily. The flight carried on, but control of the cabin had slipped from her grasp. Seat 2A, once dismissed as a mistake, had become the epicenter. And from that epicenter, a storm was rising, not just against one flight attendant, but against an entire system that cloaked contempt behind false smiles. Naomi sat tall, her eyes calm. She no longer needed coffee. She needed justice. The cockpit door swung open, the sound striking the cabin like a bell announcing the beginning of a trial. Every passenger lifted their heads, their breath held still. Captain Aaron Whitaker, 49 years old, appeared. His grey-blue eyes bore the weight of decades, his forehead etched with the lines of thousands of hours flying across continents. His steps carried the steadiness of a man used to making decisions in an instant, decisions that often carried the lives of hundreds. He swept his gaze across the cabin. On one side sat Dr. Naomi Carter, upright, calm, but her eyes gleaming like steel. On the other stood Marjorie Hale, her face flushed crimson, forcing a mask of confidence, though her lips trembled under the strain. Between them, the first-class cabin lay silent, like a theater where the audience held its breath, waiting for the next act. "Ma'am," the captain's warm baritone rolled out, each word deliberate. "I am Captain Whitaker. I've been informed you have a safety concern." Naomi nodded. "Yes, Captain." With a voice measured and unwavering, she laid it out. Each sentence as though carefully drafted beforehand. "From the moment I boarded, Chief Flight Attendant Marjorie Hale has repeatedly refused to serve me, while every other passenger was attended to. When I asked why, she implied I did not belong in this cabin. After that, she labeled me a disruptive passenger. I never raised my voice, never acted beyond courtesy. I simply existed in this seat, and that existence was treated as a problem." A spoon stilled on a silver tray. The rustle of Richard Bellamy's newspaper ceased. Evelyn Shaw lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment, not her own. The cabin had become a courtroom in the sky. Naomi the prosecutor, Marjorie the accused. Captain Whitaker turned. "Ms. Hale, your response?" Marjorie drew a sharp breath, fighting to reclaim her usual tone. "Captain, this passenger has been difficult since boarding." She pressed the call button repeatedly, demanding immediate service, disrupting my duties. I was only trying to maintain order and prioritize fairly for all. I never refused. I simply asked her to wait her turn. Naomi's lips curved in a thin smile. Wait my turn when every passenger already had their drink, except me. The captain may verify this with witnesses. Mr. Bellamy in 1C, Mrs. Shaw in 3B, and Attendant Tessa all saw what happened. I need say no more. Every gaze shifted toward Richard Bellamy. The man lowered his paper, removed his glasses, and nodded slowly. I confirm. Dr. Carter was entirely composed. I saw the difference in how she was treated. Evelyn Shaw dropped her head further, the red burning in her ears serving as silent confession. The captain's nod was slight, but his eyes turned cold as they pierced Marjorie. For an instant, her confident veneer collapsed, leaving only panic exposed. Naomi pressed on, knowing this was the decisive blow. "Captain Whitaker, this is not about service. The issue is fitness for duty. When a flight attendant allows personal prejudice to dictate her work, she becomes a threat to the safety of the entire flight. In an emergency, I cannot trust she would assist me or anyone she deems unworthy." The words landed like a gavel striking wood, reverberating through the cabin. The captain recognized the language. Fitness for duty was not a passenger complaint. It was industry code, meaning a crew member unfit to safely perform their responsibilities. The pause stretched long, heavy as an eternity. Then Captain Whitaker exhaled, his voice firm. "Miss Hale, report to the rear galley. For the remainder of this flight, Attendant Tessa will manage first class. This is a direct order." Marjorie blanched. "Captain, you cannot. This is not a debate. This is flight safety. Step away immediately." Her footsteps thudded heavily as she departed, passing the passengers like a shipwreck dragged under. The cloying perfume she wore lingered in the air, but her authority was gone. Tessa stepped forward, still trembling, but more resolute now. Naomi caught her eye, offering the faintest nod, passing her a thread of courage. The captain turned back, his tone softer, working to ease the strain. "Dr. Carter, I apologize for this incident. We will address it fully upon landing. Allow me to bring you a coffee myself." Naomi met his eyes. In hers, there was no anger, only a cold and steady resolve. "Thank you, Captain, but the coffee no longer matters. The question is whether we allow this to pass as a minor incident, or whether we stop this flight here and now to set the standard of fairness." The captain froze. He had believed replacing one attendant would suffice, but before him was not an ordinary passenger. It was Dr. Naomi Carter, the woman who had built a multi-billion-dollar agricultural technology empire. A woman who had never accepted let it go. "Captain," Naomi said, her words slow, each one reverberating through the space. "I am formally declaring that I no longer feel safe on this flight. And under FAA regulations, when a passenger raises a safety concern, the captain must decide. Proceed and assume full legal responsibility, or turn back immediately." The air in the cabin turned thick still. The roar of the engines outside could not drown out the pounding hearts within. Some passengers exchanged nervous glances. Others looked at Naomi with growing reverence. The captain understood. He looked into Naomi's eyes of someone fully aware of the power she held. And in that moment, he realized this woman was not an accidental upgrade. She was the most powerful passenger his airline had ever faced. A storm of lawsuits and media firestorms loomed on the horizon, and Naomi Carter had just placed her finger on the trigger. First class sat in utter silence. Every eye was fixed on Captain Aaron Whitaker. He stood there, hands clasped together, head bowed slightly, as though weighing the burden of 1,000 pounds pressing on his shoulders. Naomi Carter did not blink. She knew that in this moment, power was not defined by rank or logged flight hours, but by the courage to acknowledge risk. "Dr. Carter," the captain finally spoke, his voice heavy and low. "You are stating that you no longer feel safe continuing this flight." Naomi nodded. "I confirm, and I am requesting to leave the aircraft at the nearest point, here in Denver. Any other choice would be ignoring a reported safety hazard." The words sliced through the air like a blade. A few passengers gasped. Richard Bellamy adjusted his glasses, his sharp eyes flashing with the precision of a seasoned attorney. He understood Naomi had just delivered a decisive legal strike. The captain knew the stakes. To ignore the request meant assuming full responsibility before the FAA, the airline, the courts, and the press. A reckless gamble. He turned away, his gaze flickering, then slowly raised his hand to the radio. "Denver Tower, this is Asteria 417. We have a cabin safety issue. Requesting return to gate. Declaring pan-pan." The sound carried through the cabin speakers like a thunderclap. Pan. Pan. The international signal for an urgent situation just short of Mayday. A jolt rippled through the cabin. Evelyn Shaw dropped her silver spoon onto her tray. Richard Bellamy's lips curved into a half-smile, half-grimace of astonishment. Tessa stood frozen, her wide eyes betraying the weight of what had just unfolded. Naomi leaned back in her seat, calm, her hands resting lightly on her lap. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need anger. With nothing but precise, lawful words, she had turned an entire Boeing around. The plane tilted, engines roaring louder as it banked back towards the skies above Colorado. In economy class, whispers spread. What happened? Is someone sick? Mechanical issue? But in first class, the truth sat heavy as stone. They all knew it wasn't a technical fault. It was a cup of coffee that never came. In the rear galley, Marjorie Hale was unraveling. She muttered furiously to a colleague, "She's making this up. In all my years, I've never been humiliated like this. This is a setup." But no one answered. No one dared cover for her now. The captain turned back to Naomi. "Ma'am, I have honored your request. We will return to Denver. But please understand, the consequences for the airline and this crew will be severe." Naomi's eyes softened slightly. "I understand, Captain. But the truth is this. If we don't stop today, then tomorrow someone else will endure the same. Someone weaker, someone without the chance to speak. I could stay silent and drink a late coffee. But in doing so, I would become complicit in contempt." The captain said nothing. In that moment, he no longer saw Naomi as a troublesome passenger. He saw her as a judge, forcing the system itself to confront its reflection. The plane descended. Denver sprawled into view under the morning sun, as though the sky itself bore witness to this historic reckoning. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Due to a cabin safety issue, we are returning to Denver. Please remain seated until we reconnect with the jet bridge." A collective exhale filled the cabin. Some frowned, some whispered, but many eyes turned discreetly toward Naomi, carrying a mixture of astonishment, respect, and gratitude. In Naomi's mind, one thought rang clear. This is only the beginning. The plane's wheels struck the runway, the impact reverberating like a drumbeat marking the start of Act 2. As the jet bridge locked into place, Naomi rose, slipping her jacket over her shoulders. Richard Bellamy stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, that was the most professional presentation I have ever witnessed. If you need witnesses, you have my card." Naomi accepted the thick card, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Another ally had emerged. At the exit, Marjorie was summoned forward. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with hatred, laced with fear. No one in the cabin stood with her now. No false smiles could mask the truth. The door opened. Denver's light poured in. On the jet bridge stood a man in a wrinkled suit, his badge reading Daniel Ortiz, Duty Manager. His expression betrayed confusion. Beside him, a female airline employee waited. "Dr. Takata," Ortiz began hastily, "we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. We will arrange another flight to New York within 90 minutes, with full lounge privileges." Naomi did not answer right away. She looked directly at Daniel, her smile thin, sharp as a blade. "Mr. Ortiz, let's be clear. This is not an inconvenience. This is a safety incident arising from the discriminatory conduct of your senior crew member, and I have no intention of flying with Asteria again today." Ortiz's face fell as though struck. Passengers behind her fell silent. Naomi stepped firmly down the jet bridge, leaving behind an airline on the brink of crisis. The jet bridge leading into Denver's terminal was icy cold, fluorescent lights reflecting on the polished floor. Overlapping announcements for passengers echoed through the air, but all of it seemed drowned out by the heavy atmosphere surrounding Dr. Naomi Carter. Daniel Ortiz, the duty manager, walked at her side, his confused expression hidden poorly behind a strained smile. He extended his hand, but Naomi did not take it. She walked slowly, deliberately, like someone leading a procession out of a battlefield. "Dr. Carter," Daniel said, his voice striving for calm reassurance. "We will arrange another flight, of course free of charge, with full VIP service. This was simply an unfortunate misunderstanding." Naomi stopped, turning on her heel. Her eyes, deep and dark, glimmered with a terrifying calm. "A misunderstanding? Mr. Ortiz, use the right words. This was an act of open discrimination, and that aircraft turned back not for mechanical failure, but because I, a passenger, declared I no longer felt safe. Remember that clearly." Footsteps slowed. A few first-class passengers trailed behind, quietly observing. Richard Bellamy clasped his hands in front of him, silent, like an attorney gathering evidence at a crime scene. Daniel swallowed hard. He tried to redirect. "Then what do you want from me right now?" Naomi drew a fountain pen from her pocket, her gaze razor sharp. 1. The full names and employee IDs of the crew. Captain Aaron Whitaker, First Officer Eleanor Park, Lead Flight Attendant Marjorie Hale, and Ms. Tessa Nguyen. 2. A written incident report signed by you personally, stating the reason Flight 417 returned to the gate. I want it within 15 minutes. That, I'm afraid, will require approval. Mr. Ortiz, Naomi cut in, her voice dropping like the strike of a blade. I am the CEO of Terra Nova Labs. Every year, my company spends over $20 million on Asteria Airways. If you cannot hand me a simple piece of paper within 15 minutes, then my attorneys will demand it in federal court. Which way do you prefer? Sweat beaded on Daniel's forehead. He nodded frantically and turned to make a call. Naomi continued into the terminal. Light flooded the wide space, crowded with passengers. But to her, it felt like a vast stage where she had just completed the opening act. The real storm was only beginning. She took out her phone and dialed a familiar number. A warm voice answered. Brenda here, Madam CEO. Brenda, I will not be traveling to New York today. Cancel all my bookings on Asteria, including the return flight. And one more thing, send a formal notice to Thomas Granger's office, their CEO. Inform him Terra Nova Labs is suspending all corporate travel contracts worth $20 million, effective immediately. Brenda hesitated only a beat. Yes, I'll handle it right away. Naomi continued. And contact Charlotte Harper at Harper, Lang & Rowe. Tell her I have a case bigger than any deal this week. Ending the call, Naomi inhaled deeply. The air smelled of coffee and pastries from a nearby stand, but she no longer needed any of it. What she was brewing now was a far stronger dose, a medicine that would force an entire corporation to face the truth. Behind her, hard shoes clicked against the floor. Captain Aaron approached, holding a clipboard. He handed it to Daniel Ortiz, but his eyes met Naomi's. Dr. Carter, he said evenly. I've written the preliminary report. I confirm that the actions of Attendant Hale were the cause of this incident. I trust Mr. Ortiz will provide you a copy immediately. Naomi took the document and scanned it quickly. The handwriting was clear, precise, official, an undeniable piece of evidence. Thank you, Captain, she replied. You've done what was necessary. But you know as well as I do, removing one attendant is not a solution. It is only a bandage over a malignant wound, and I will not allow that cancer to remain. The captain sighed, fatigue etched on his face. I understand. He gave a brief nod and turned away. Naomi checked her watch. Time was running, but no longer in flight time. This was the clock of a public reckoning. Beyond the glass doors, Marjorie Hale was being escorted by security into a private room for questioning. Her face was ashen, her eyes burning with speechless hatred. But it no longer mattered. From the moment Naomi pressed the call button a second time in that cabin, Marjorie's fate had been sealed. In Naomi's mind, her father's words echoed, "You were not born to be silent. You were born to make others listen." She pressed her lips together. This was no longer about a woman and a cup of coffee. This was a battle to expose an entire culture of rot. And Naomi Carter, once dismissed as someone in the wrong seat, now commanded the entire stage. The storm had fully formed, and no one at Asteria Airways could stop it now. Chicago, 9 a.m. the next morning. The glass and steel headquarters of Asteria Airways gleamed in the autumn sun, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy as lead. Thomas Granger, 61 years old, slammed a printed email onto the table. His voice cracked through the silence like a gunshot. 1 cup of coffee. 1 passenger. And now we've lost a $20 million contract from Terra Nova Labs. Who is going to explain this to me? The 10-meter mahogany table remained silent. The golden Asteria logo reflected light across its polished surface, but no one dared look at it directly. Faces around the boardroom were tense, eyes avoiding Granger's furious glare. At last, a middle-aged man, heavy-set with graying hair, adjusted his tie slowly before speaking. This was Leonard Pike, 55, Vice President of Human Resources, the seasoned firefighter of countless internal scandals. "Mr. CEO," Leonard began, his slightly hoarse voice layered with practiced confidence, "I've reviewed the preliminary report. This is not a systemic issue. It's an isolated case. A veteran flight attendant, Marjorie Hale, may have overreacted. We can treat this as an exception and protect the airline's image." Granger narrowed his eyes, his breath hissing through his chest. "An exception? Leonard, an exception that forces a plane to turn back, that causes our number, one corporate client, to cancel a contract immediately. What kind of exception costs $20 million? Leonard didn't flinch. He was accustomed to storms and believed he could steer this one. He lowered his voice, feigning reason. "The crux of this issue isn't the attendant's behavior. It's how Mrs. Carter responded. We all know powerful CEOs thrive on influence. I believe she exploited the situation, magnifying it into a performance designed to pressure the airline. If we admit to a systemic failure, the precedent will be extremely dangerous." A marketing executive interjected, voice trembling with unease. "But social media is already spreading the story. Aviation blogs are reporting Flight 407 turned back because a VIP was unhappy with service." Leonard allowed himself a thin smile, a smile filled with calculation. "Exactly. And that's the narrative we can push. Amplify the idea. A demanding passenger disrupted the flight. No mention of race, no mention of discrimination, just a difficult passenger. People will believe it, because it's the easier story to swallow." Granger stared at Leonard. For a fleeting moment, the CEO saw him clearly, not as someone defending justice, but as someone willing to protect the company at any cost, even through lies. But Granger also knew, in this ruthless business world, lies were often the familiar weapon. "Fine," Granger bit out. "What's your plan?" Leonard inhaled, his hand gesturing in the air like a conductor. "First, send a legal letter to Carter's attorney, Charlotte Harper. The letter will express regret over the misunderstanding, but insist there was no discriminatory behavior. We emphasize the captain only turned back to reduce tension, not because of misconduct. Along with that, offer a small compensation package, flight vouchers, a few $1,000s, and if Carter wants to resume the contract, we'll sweeten the corporate deal." Murmurs rippled through the table. Some nodded, others frowned, but no one objected openly. Leonard had framed it as the only path forward. Thomas Granger leaned back, arms folded. He knew this wasn't a solution, just duct tape slapped over a gaping wound. But in the suffocating moment, even duct tape felt safer than a deadly void. "Do it," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Leonard nodded. His eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. To him, this was nothing but a chess game, and the sacrificial piece was never the company. It was always the victim. That afternoon, in a glass-walled office high above the city, Charlotte Harper received Asteria's legal letter. She read it swiftly, then let out a sharp, dry laugh that cut the air like a blade. Across from her, Naomi Carter lifted her eyes. "What does it say?" Charlotte laid the letter on the table. "A masterpiece of contempt. They call it a service misunderstanding. They suggest a few vouchers, plus a corporate discount package. And most importantly, they sidestep the word discrimination as if it were the plague." Naomi raised her brows. She wasn't angry. She wasn't disappointed. She only exhaled slowly. "I see. This is the old playbook. Turn the victim into the unreasonable one. Turn my action into a tantrum. They think I'll fear the label of being the demanding woman of color." Charlotte nodded, her eyes razor-sharp. "They think they're playing an old game. But they don't realize they just sat down at the chessboard with you." Naomi stood and walked toward the glass window. Below, the city pulsed with life as if nothing had happened. But inside her, a fire was roaring. "Charlotte, I don't want an apology anymore. I want change. And I am prepared to fight this to the end." Charlotte's lips curved into a blade-thin smile, her voice cutting down like an executioner's strike. "Then let's show them. They think this is about one incident of discrimination on a flight. But in truth, this will be the battle that exposes the rotten culture they've hidden for 30 years. In that office, 2 women stood side by side. One, a CEO once dismissed as sitting in the wrong seat. The other, a battle-hardened attorney with a reputation for tearing corporations apart. And outside, a global airline had just stepped into a war it could never win. The Denver night sky lay quiet, but in the temporary office of Harper, Lang and Rowe, the lights blazed white as day. Documents covered the tables. Laptop screens flickered with transcripts. Charlotte Harper, silver hair framing sharp eyes behind round glasses, led a team of young attorneys. At the center of the room, Dr. Naomi Carter sat upright, hands folded together. She was not a typical client. She was a commander in this battle, calm, focused, and ready to fight to the end. Charlotte's voice cut through the hum of work. "First step, witnesses. We need clear testimony from those who saw Marjorie Hale's behavior. Every word, every detail must be recorded. Not just to sue, but to dismantle the smear campaign Asteria is about to launch." A young lawyer spoke up. "Richard Bellamy, the prominent Denver attorney, has agreed to testify. He will provide a video deposition." Naomi nodded. She remembered the man in seat 1C lowering his newspaper, eyes sharpening as he watched the truth unfold. He understands the law. His testimony will slice straight through Asteria's narrative of an unruly VIP passenger. Charlotte's smile was cold. Exactly. But even more crucial, we need Tessa and Gwen. The room grew heavy. Tessa, just 26, the young flight attendant who had witnessed everything and had the courage to alert the captain, a golden piece of the puzzle, but also the most fragile one. Naomi rose, moving to the window. Beyond the glass, the city lights stretched endlessly, like an infinite chessboard. Tessa is afraid. I saw it in her eyes. The union, her colleagues, her superiors, they will all pressure her into silence. If I leave her alone, she will be crushed. Charlotte slipped off her glasses, her gaze flashing with resolve. Naomi, what do you plan to do? Naomi turned back, her voice low and firm. I'll meet her directly. Not a lawyer, not an employee. Me. Because only I can show her that this isn't a fight for compensation. This is a fight to change the system itself. 2 days later, a small cafe in the Denver suburbs, warm yellow lights, the faint scent of roasted beans. Tessa entered, slight figure, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. She bit her lip, scanning the room nervously, before stopping at Naomi's table. Dr. Carter, she whispered. I don't know if I can help. If I speak out, they'll fire me. My career will be over. Naomi set her cup down, her gaze softening. Tessa, I didn't come here to pressure you. I came to tell you I understand that fear. I've stood in rooms where everyone looked at me and decided I wasn't worthy of a CEO's chair. But I still sat. I still existed. And today, I'm still here. Tessa trembled, her lips quivering. But if I go against Marjorie and the system, I'll lose everything. Naomi leaned in, her voice steady, each word striking deep. No, Tessa. If you stay silent, that's when you lose everything. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when you watch another passenger humiliated like I was, you'll ask yourself, I had a chance to stop this, and that question will haunt you for the rest of your life. A tear slid down Tessa's cheek. Naomi placed a business card from Terra Nova Labs on the table. You won't be alone. Charlotte and I will give you lifetime legal protection. And if the airline fires you, I will personally hire you at Terra Nova at double your salary. You can start tomorrow. The room stilled. Tessa bit her lip until it bled. Then she drew a sharp breath, her small shoulders trembling. All right, I'll speak. I'll tell everything. Marjorie wasn't just wrong with you. She's been wrong with so many others before, and they all stayed silent. Naomi nodded, pride flickering in her eyes. A door had opened. A witness was ready to break the wall of silence. Weeks later, at Charlotte Harper's office in Chicago, boxes of documents lined the hallways. The discovery order had succeeded. 30 years of Marjorie Hale's records and employee complaints under Leonard Pike's oversight were delivered to the legal team. A young lawyer opened a box, pulling out pages. Thousands of sheets, petty complaints, meaningless reports, old financial logs, all junk. Another muttered with frustration. They buried the truth under a mountain of paper. How do we find anything? Charlotte stepped forward, lifting a stack, her eyes sharp as blades. No, they didn't erase it. They just hid it. What we need is a pattern, a repetition, a name that resurfaces, a detail out of place. Naomi stood with arms crossed. Keep digging, because I know under this pile there's a rotten system waiting to be dragged into the light. The room fell silent. Only the sound of pages turning filled the air, each line of black ink becoming a thread in a web far larger than a denied cup of coffee. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, whispering to herself, They wanted to make me a spectacle, but I'll turn their silence into evidence. And the storm was still forming, fiercer than ever. The hallways of Harper, Lang and Rowe were still lined with towering boxes of files, papers stacked like walls. Night after night, the legal team took turns flipping through every page, their eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Naomi Carter was there almost constantly, not as a client, but as a soldier guarding the front lines. She sat amid the sea of paper, her gaze fixed on each report, each sterile line of text. Every time a page was discarded, she reminded herself, "Do not rush. The truth does not vanish. It only hides in the smallest of details." One late night, Evelyn Tran, a forensic finance expert, burst into the room, breathless. In her hands was an old file folder, its pages smelling of mold and age. "Charlotte, Naomi, I think I've found something." The entire room fell silent. Evelyn spread the papers across the table, pointing to a series of expense reports from Marjorie Hale. "Here," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Lisbon, Rio de Janeiro. Bills from Michelin, star restaurants, 5-star hotels. Expenses triple the crew allowance. And the most important part, every one of them approved, signed by Peter Hale." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, sharp light flickering within them. Peter Hale, Marjorie's ex-husband. He used to be a mid-level financial manager. Naomi's brows furrowed as she repeated slowly. "And when did they divorce?" "About 5 years ago," Evelyn replied. A spark lit in Naomi's mind. She knew that broken marriages often left behind the darkest things, resentment, and resentment could sometimes be the key to exposing the truth. Charlotte rose to her feet, her voice a command. "Get in touch with Peter Hale immediately. If anyone knows Marjorie's secrets, it's him." The next day, a private investigator from the firm flew to Florida. A small house by the beach, faded roof tiles, windows coated with dust. Peter Hale opened the door, weary figure, beer belly, eyes clouded by years of bitterness. "What do you want?" he asked, voice hoarse. The investigator handed him a card. "We represent Dr. Naomi Carter. We'd like to ask about irregular expenses by Mrs. Marjorie Hale during her time at Asteria." At the mention of Marjorie's name, Peter's eyes lit with hatred. He let out a dry, jagged laugh, the sound of a man who had been waiting for this day. "Marjorie." He drew out the name, as if tasting the bitterness again. She always thought she was untouchable, thought that uniform was her divine shield. "You want the truth? I'll give it. Because I've kept the evidence, waiting for this day of reckoning." He dragged out an old metal box and dropped it heavily onto the table. Inside were bank statements, photocopied emails, handwritten notes. "It's not just about luxury spending," Peter said, his voice laced with venom. "Marjorie was running a smuggling operation right under that uniform. Antiques, jewelry, rare books, small, compact, easy to hide. She had a special suitcase, always checked as crew baggage. And she had a man on the ground crew who made sure that bag was never inspected." The investigator froze. "Do you have proof?" Peter nodded sharply, his eyes gleaming. "I kept the bank records from a secret account in Portugal. That's where she funneled the money. I kept everything, waiting for today." That night, The detailed report landed on Charlotte Harper's desk. She read line by line, her expression growing colder with each page. When she finally closed the file, she looked up at Naomi, her voice carrying the weight of a verdict. "Naomi, this is no longer just a discrimination case. This is federal crime. A senior flight attendant exploited her position to smuggle contraband across borders with the complicity of HR, and now, thanks to her contempt for you, we have the spark to burn the whole system down." Naomi sat still, her eyes deep and dark. She remembered Marjorie's whisper in the cabin. "Honey, maybe you got upgraded by mistake." Words that once cut her pride now revealed themselves as the doorway to a swamp of crime. Her voice came steady, each word like steel. "Then we are no longer playing a small game. It's time to drop the bomb." Charlotte smiled, her face lit with the ruthless confidence of a seasoned lawyer. "Exactly. And my first call tomorrow morning won't be to Asteria. It will be to the Department of Justice." That night, Naomi left the office, stepping into Chicago's bright streets. The cold wind slapped her face, but her chest burned hot. She had gone from a passenger ignored in first class to the witness pulling an entire airline into the storm. A storm no longer about a cup of coffee, but about an international smuggling ring. Naomi looked up at the night sky. Airplanes still carved their glowing paths like arrows of light. But she knew, from now on, for Asteria, the skies would no longer be free. They would become a tribunal suspended above the earth, where truth would be revealed and old power torn down. And she, once dismissed as sitting in the wrong seat, was now the one holding the gavel of justice. Asteria Airways headquarters in Chicago. Monday morning. The vast conference room on the 42nd floor held a gleaming mahogany table that stretched like a mirror. On the wall, the airline's silver-winged logo reflected the morning sun, but inside that room, no one felt its warmth. Thomas Granger, 61, the CEO, sat at the head of the table. Beside him was Elaine Porter, the chief legal counsel, compact frame, face hard as steel. In front of them, 2 empty chairs waited. The door opened. Charlotte Harper entered, clad in a dark grey suit, silver hair neatly tied, her eyes sharp and gleaming like a blade. At her side, Dr. Naomi Carter, tall, long coat flowing, each step firm and deliberate. The two of them walked in like warriors entering the enemy's stronghold, yet without a trace of fear. Thomas awkwardly rose and extended his hand. Naomi gave a slight nod, but did not shake it. Not out of disrespect, but to make it clear from the first moment. Today, the balance of power had shifted. "Thank you for coming," Thomas began, trying to steady his tone. "I hope we can resolve this matter reasonably." Charlotte did not answer. She sat down and placed a red folder on the table, slowly, deliberately. Elaine's eyes locked on it, as if it contained a bomb. Naomi broke the silence. "Mr. Granger, we are not here today to hear a half-hearted apology. We are here to force you to face the truth." Thomas's brow furrowed, irritation flashing across his face. "What truth, Dr. Carter? I've read the report. A flight attendant behaved improperly. We suspended her. That should have been the end of it." Charlotte's cold smile cut the air. She slid the folder across to Thomas. "Read this." Elaine snatched it up and opened it. Inside were bank statements, internal emails, and a signed affidavit from Peter Hale. The more she read, the paler she grew. When she finally looked up, her eyes, usually unwavering, flickered with unease. These are serious allegations," she whispered. Charlotte's voice struck like a hammer. "Not allegations. Evidence. Marjorie Hale, your 30-year veteran chief flight attendant, has been smuggling contraband through crew baggage, antiques, jewelry, rare books. And she had an accomplice on the ground crew. The Lisbon Bank has confirmed the accounts. We delivered the file to the Department of Justice this morning." Thomas lunged forward, yanking the papers. His face flushed, then drained of color. He muttered, "No, this can't be." Naomi leaned in, her voice reverberating through the room. "Mr. Granger, I told your captain on Flight 417 that this was never about coffee. It was about culture. When a flight attendant brings prejudice into the cabin, she only needs an excuse to erase the passenger she deems unworthy. And when HR shields and enables her, the rot stops being personal. It becomes systemic." Charlotte's tone was merciless. "Do you know who approved every report tied to Marjorie for the past decade? Leonard Pike. He didn't just shield discriminatory behavior. He shielded a federal criminal. Instead of auditing, he buried the truth under paperwork. And the result? Asteria is now staring down the DOJ, the media, and a civil lawsuit that could wipe billions off your stock." Elaine Porter faltered, lips moving but no rebuttal forming. Thomas collapsed back into his chair, his trembling hands clutching the folder. Naomi tilted her head, her voice steady yet resonant. "Mr. Granger, you think you have options. The truth is, the only option left is a controlled surrender. Otherwise, Asteria will be destroyed in this storm." Thomas looked at the two women before him. One, a black CEO once dismissed as sitting in the wrong seat. The other, a silver-haired lawyer with unrelenting eyes. He realized he was no longer steering the game. He was cornered, and checkmate was the only outcome. Charlotte's voice sliced through the silence like a verdict. "Here is what will happen. You will immediately terminate Leonard Pike for gross negligence. You will hire an independent investigation team, approved by us, to reform the entire HR department. You will issue a public apology, admitting discrimination against Dr. Naomi Carter. You will fund mandatory company-wide training, which we will call the Carter Initiative. And finally, you will pay damages in the 8-figure range, non-negotiable." The room fell into suffocating silence. Thomas turned to Elaine. The legal counsel gave a slow, heavy shake of her head. There was no escape. Thomas's shoulders slumped, his voice hoarse. "Agreed." Naomi gave a small nod. No triumph, no gloating. Only the confirmation that justice had forced the powerful to bow. Charlotte retrieved the folder and stood. "Good. Then we will finalize the documents this week. And from today on, Asteria is no longer the airline that tried to evade the truth. You will be the living proof of the price for protecting prejudice." Naomi turned and walked toward the door. Each step echoed like the tolling of a bell, a funeral march for a rotten culture. In that moment, Thomas Granger understood. He had not just lost a case. He had lost an era. Wednesday morning, before the first light could chase away the mist, black FBI SUVs pulled up in front of Marjorie Hale's suburban house. The pounding on the door echoed like gunfire. "FBI! Open up now!" Marjorie jolted upright in bed, her face pale, blonde hair disheveled. When the door burst open, agents in black windbreakers stormed inside, handcuffs clinking. She shrieked, voice shrill and desperate. "You can't do this to me! I'm the chief flight attendant of Asteria!" But the words carried no weight. She was forced to the floor, wrists locked behind her back. On the kitchen table lay wooden crates and velvet pouches of jewelry she hadn't yet hidden. A secret treasure trove, now undeniable evidence. Television crews arrived quickly, cameras catching Marjorie being led to the car, her face twisted with rage and terror. The image spread across morning broadcasts, the ticker blazing. Asteria chief flight attendant arrested for international smuggling. At the same time, in Chicago headquarters, Leonard Pike walked into the CEO's office expecting another crisis meeting. Before he could sit, 2 security guards appeared. Thomas Granger's voice was glacial. "Leonard, you are terminated immediately for gross negligence and obstruction of investigation. Your company accounts are locked. Hand over your badge and leave the building." Leonard's face turned purple. "Thomas, you can't. I've protected this airline for 20 years. There is no I anymore," Thomas cut him off. "There is a corporation drowning in crisis because of your cover-ups. Leave." A small cardboard box of personal belongings was shoved into his arms. As he was escorted through the marble lobby, employees whispered, eyes filled with curiosity and contempt. Each step echoed not with power, but with the sound of a man consumed by his own lies. The news detonated. CNN, BBC, the New York Times ran with the headline, "Asteria Scandal. From first-class discrimination to international smuggling ring." The Washington Post wrote, "From a single denied cup of coffee, Dr. Naomi Carter forced a global airline to confront the rot within its system. The incident not only exposed simmering racial prejudice, but also unveiled a decades-long smuggling network." Twitter exploded with hashtags Justice at 35,000 Fat and Touch Carter Initiative. Hundreds of thousands shared the video of Naomi calmly telling the captain, "I no longer feel safe." That line became a slogan, printed on posters, even T-shirts. Naomi sat in her Denver office, quietly watching. Every news story, every headline was another shard proving the truth could no longer be buried. But she felt no glee. To her, this was not a personal victory. It was proof that one person could force an entire solar system to bow. Charlotte Harper entered, newspaper in hand. She placed it on the desk, her voice steady. "We've started an earthquake, but Naomi, you know the aftershocks will be long." Naomi nodded, her gaze calm yet sharp. "I don't fear aftershocks, as long as they sweep away the rot that remains." In her living room, Tessa Nguyen watched the news, tears welling in her eyes. She saw Naomi standing tall at the airport, saw Marjorie in handcuffs. A new feeling surged inside her. Freedom. She had chosen correctly. Truth had triumphed over fear. Her phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. "Tessa, I haven't forgotten my promise. A position at Terra Nova Logistics is waiting. When you're ready, step into your new chapter." Tears rolled down Tessa's cheeks. She knew a new life had just begun. At Asteria headquarters, Thomas Granger stepped onto the stage for a press conference, his face heavy. Flashbulbs exploded. He took a deep breath and declared, "Today, Asteria Airways publicly apologizes to Dr. Naomi Carter. We acknowledge the unacceptable act of discrimination on Flight 417 and strongly condemn any such behavior. We also confirm the existence of a smuggling ring tied to former Chief Attendant Marjorie Hale. To make amends, Asteria will launch a system-wide training program called the Carter Initiative to eradicate prejudice and rebuild our culture." The press room shook. A global airline had bowed its head in unprecedented admission. Naomi watched from her screen. A faint smile appeared, not one of triumph, but the smile of someone who knew justice had just laid the first stone of a long road ahead. From a cup of coffee denied, Naomi had sparked an explosion that shook the skies of aviation. But she knew the journey was not over. One final step remained, to turn this event into a legacy, so no one else would ever endure what she had in Seat 2A. 3 months after the media storm, the Denver sky was unusually clear. At the city's largest convention center, a sea of people in suits, pilot uniforms, and blue flight attendant dresses filled the hall. Thousands of Asteria Airways employees sat facing the stage, where a massive banner hung high. Carter Initiative, the beginning of a new era of justice. The lights shone down as Dr. Naomi Carter stepped forward. Still tall and slender in a charcoal suit, but her presence today was transformed. No longer the solitary passenger in Seat 2A. No longer the one pushed aside. Today she was the invited voice on stage, the symbol of change. Behind the curtain, Tessa Nguyen, in her new Terra Nova Logistics uniform, watched with shining eyes. Once a flight attendant paralyzed by fear, she was now a training manager, officially part of the Carter Initiative program for Asteria. A turning point in her life, born from a courageous choice in a small coffee shop. Naomi gripped the microphone. Her voice carried, steady and resonant across the hall. Today, we are not just talking about an airline. We are talking about how we treat one another. I was once made invisible, dismissed because of my skin color and where I sat. But I refused to stay silent, and in that moment, we were forced to face the truth. If one passenger can be overlooked, then any one of us can be devalued. The hall was silent. Thousands of eyes locked on her, each word rippling outward like stones across water. Naomi's voice softened, but grew even more powerful. We cannot erase what has happened, but we can transform it into the foundation of a new culture. The Carter Initiative is not an apology. It is a commitment that every employee will be trained to understand that respect is not optional, it is an obligation. Justice is not a slogan, it is the standard. Applause thundered, echoing through the hall. Among the crowd, a few young flight attendants wiped away tears. A week later, Naomi held a press conference at Terra Nova Labs headquarters. She announced the creation of the Carter Foundation, using the 8-figure settlement from Asteria to fund scholarships for women of color pursuing careers in STEM and aviation. "This is not compensation for me," Naomi said, before a forest of microphones. "This is an investment in the next generation. Every young woman who walks into a laboratory or a cockpit carrying her dream and her determination will be living proof that justice does not only win in a courtroom, it wins on the runway of the future. The news spread quickly, newspapers calling it a double victory, exposing the truth while transforming pain into opportunity. In a small apartment in New York, Evelyn Shaw, the passenger from seat 3B, who had witnessed the events of Flight 417, watched the broadcast and sighed quietly. She remembered the moment she had bowed her head instead of speaking up. Now, seeing Naomi turn everything into a movement, Evelyn whispered, "If only I had been braver that day." That regret became a reminder to millions of viewers. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. In a federal prison cell, Marjorie Hale wore an orange jumpsuit, her vacant eyes staring through the bars. The metallic echoes around her played like a funeral dirge for her once proud past. A woman who once strode with authority through first-class aisles was now caged by her own prejudice and greed. In another apartment, Leonard Pike sat alone, television flickering with images of Naomi receiving an award for contributions to social justice. He switched it off, his face dark. 30 years of career erased, his name now remembered only as a cautionary tale of failed cover-ups. And Naomi? She returned to the gleaming halls of Terra Nova, employees greeting her with smiles filled with pride. Yet inside, she did not see this as a personal victory. She remembered that suffocating cabin when Marjorie had said, "Honey, maybe you're in the wrong seat." Naomi smiled faintly. "No, I was never in the wrong seat. I sat exactly where I needed to be, at exactly the right time. And from seat 2A, I shifted an entire system. Audiences worldwide heard Naomi's story and saw themselves in it. Those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or judged by appearance or origin, all found hope." Naomi ended the press conference with a message that rang out like a bell. Never accept being erased. One person, one voice, one courageous moment can be enough to force the world to change its course. Camera flashes lit the room, applause erupted like a wave, and from that day forward, the Carter Initiative was no longer just a training program. It became a symbol of the power of truth, proof that the greatest legacies sometimes begin with a single cup of coffee denied. From a single cup of coffee denied, one woman forced an entire airline giant to bow its head. Naomi Carter did not just defend her own dignity. She exposed a rotten culture, dragged a smuggling ring into the light, and transformed humiliation into a legacy called the Carter Initiative. This story reminds us that change does not always begin in grand boardrooms or solemn courtrooms. Sometimes it begins with one small moment, when someone dares to say, "I will not accept this." And now the question is for you, the one watching this video. If you were in that moment, would you stay silent, or would you stand up and rewrite the rules? If this story resonates with you, hit like, share, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you journeys of justice and the powerful revelations that force the world to listen.